Chapter 7. Zvander. A frigid wind beat against the hard leather mask, covering the lower half of Zvander's face as he made his way down the dark and empty street toward Black Salt Tavern. Even that far from the citadel, he made a point to disguise his identity. Whispers reached his keen ears, villagers who both loathed and feared him breathing their words of faith into the air as he passed, ridiculous prayers that faded like mist in his wake. The cursed Lord of Eidolon, a demon, they called him. Better that they knew him for the curse than the killings he carried out at the king's behest. He was evil, after all. Only a soulless creature could take life so swiftly and easily as he did. No remorse, no emotion, nothing but a trained animal forged from pain and suffering. 2 radiant moons illuminated the dusky sky, blanketing the ancient city in a silvery glow. Tall Gothic spires of shops and cathedrals sliced through low-lying clouds, their shadows stretching over the worn cobblestone streets, whose wet surface splashed against the soles of his sturdy leather boots. Black Caligosian leather, named after the fierce creature whose hide was used to make it, clung tight to his body, the thick queer ass keeping him warm against the oncoming winter. The black hooded cloak he wore swept behind him, concealing the black Venatox steel sword that any savvy thief would have loved to swipe from his back. Brisk strides brought him closer to the tavern, and he turned his head slightly, avoiding the stares of those who stumbled out the entrance, drunks who dared to stare longer than they should have. Most respectable villagers tended to avoid him like a bad case of mirapox, which suited Zvander just fine. Just outside the building crouched a young boy, no more than a decade old. His gangly arms and pale skin revealed a map of pink veins that identified him as a spindling child, born with no magic in his blood at all. 2 black horns stuck out from the top of his head, curving backward, their short length confirming his youth. Another unsavory trait of spindlings, ensuring they were often viewed as savages, as most Nixtarosi children had their horns cut at birth, the stubs usually hidden beneath their hair. Etherians often possessed unique powers specific for their bloodline, gifted at birth, making them mansborn or mansers. Much of the poor, living in the squalor of the hovel, couldn't afford the vital vivicantum required to sustain their powers. And over time, the blood magic languished, diminishing to nothing. Those born with blood magic who suffered a severe vivicantum deficiency and consequently lost their inherited powers were called Nylavir. While they still possessed longevity that set them apart from the mere mortals who resided in the deadlands of Mortasia, they were looked down upon by high-blood Etherians. The worst were the children born to them, spindlings, who were often treated like animals and used as slaves in one manner or another. Fiery red eyes, common for spindling children, stared back at him as he approached. Once inside the tavern, Zvander swept his gaze over time-weathered wooden booths that sat mostly empty, save for the relentless few still up at that hour. He clocked every being from one corner of the tavern to the other, and sighted an older man with dark, tawny skin and long white hair toward the back. His tall, pointed ears identified him as Elvanira, a common sight in Nixtaros. But what wasn't common was the skill that he possessed, one that set him apart and had, perhaps, caused him to lose his mind. For years, he'd served as one of the king's most prominent mages, a respected member of the elite Magistroli, whose specialty was interpreting ancient codices and scrolls. He also possessed the power of foresight, a curse, as he'd often expressed, which made him privy to fearsome visions, revelations that had turned the brilliant mage into an ale-guzzling recluse. En route toward him, Zvander unbuckled the baldric at his chest and removed the scabbard holding his sword, but didn't bother to remove the half-face leather mask, which left only his eyes exposed. "You're late," Dolian rasped and glanced around the tavern. Zivander slid into the booth across from him, resting his sword beside him. The single black steel pauldron at his left shoulder, just beneath the cloak, felt bulky in the narrow booth, but he ignored his discomfort. He didn't bother to address the man's comment either, as he reached into a pocket of his leather jerkin and removed that perfect red spherical stone he'd collected. With shaky hands, Dolian accepted the stone and, from somewhere beside him, lifted a slim leather box that he opened to show 5 other stones, each a varying shade of red, every one of them a life Zivander had taken. Dolian held the stone up to the lantern beside them on the table, out of view so as not to rouse the attention of anyone else. "The power of an entire bloodline cast in one stone," he said, as he slid the object into a small depression beside the others. A patriarch reduced to ash. Not that Zivander gave a good God's damn for the greedy Manser. He just liked to remind Dolian that it was he who had risked his ass to acquire those stones. The mirthful expression on the older man's face faded. I do not take pleasure in such thoughts. However, some deserved their fate, parading around in jewels while their people starve. Yes, some deserved it, and some did not. I suppose that it's not your conscience that must reconcile, but mine. I didn't know you had one. I don't. Dolian chuckled. Well, you do possess an incredible power, my friend. What he possessed was nothing incredible. Sable fire consumed. It drew cravings out of him that he didn't care to entertain. It was madness in the making, an unfortunate fate. One he'd hoped to spare himself from by collecting the stones that would fuel the most powerful scepter in existence. The Septimir, an impressive weapon that Dolian had advised, was powerful enough to banish the dangerous black flame from his body. In his furtive glancing around, Zivander caught sight of a man he'd noticed when he'd first walked in. Sat in the corner of the tavern, his hood pulled up over his face as he lifted his tankard for a sip of ale. Zivander's stare lingered a moment, and he studied the slow and easy movements of the stranger, who set his drink back down, not bothering to look up to allow Zivander a good look at his face. Making a mental note to watch him, Zivander resumed his scanning over the thin crowd to a man sitting adjacent to him and Dolian. On his forearm, he bore the mark of a predator. Rapax, those who took advantage of children in one form or another, either by sexual favors or abuse. The marks were issued by the Imperial Guard to identify them as molesters, and most served time in the mines of Salatia. Having spent time there himself, Zivander was all too familiar with his kind. A distant voice chimed inside Zivander's head. "Knees, boy." Cold stirred in his chest as the image of him on his knees flashed inside his head. "Open your mouth." The flavor of ash and embers burned his tongue. "Now swallow." His fists tightened, and Zivander squeezed his eyes shut on the horrible scene in his mind. "You belong to me, boy, from this night on. And what hell you will suffer." A new vision came to me. Dolian's words interrupted Zivander's thoughts, and he opened his eyes to see the man across from him marveling his stones, seemingly oblivious to his surroundings. Zivander unclenched his hands, noting the deep, bloody crescents in his palm. "A forest," Dolian prattled on, slipping the case of stones into his pocket. One of thick mist and shimmer, a stone with silver markings. He lifted his tankard for a sip of ale, his shaking hands nearly spilling the drink over the rim. Hard to believe, a time ago, the old man's visions were respected and sought out by the king himself. He'd disgraced his once revered bloodline with his mad ravings. Dolian signaled the barmaid, who sauntered over with 2 tankards of ale that she slammed onto the table, her gaze never wavering from the mask that covered Zivander's face. Most tended to fear him, the smart ones, anyway. The moment she slipped away, Zivander leaned in toward the man across from him. "The forest you speak of is Hag's Mist. Need I remind you crossing the boundary is forbidden?" At the end of Hagsmist Forest, just before the land fell into the sea, stood the Umbra Veil, the imperceptible ward that had been weaved by the great mages centuries ago, the only portal into the mortal world guarded by the king's cavalry. In order to break your curse, I require the full complement of stones, all 7 bloodlines. Zivander had crossed continents to retrieve the stones of the many races that made up Etheria: Orgoths, Elvenira, Salacians, Lunasir. Those whose bloodlines were purest, the descendants of the ancients, whose combined power, when harnessed by the Septimir, was said to have formed the very boundary Dolian wished to cross into the mortal lands. Lands believed to have been nothing but a wasteland, as no Etherian could have possibly survived there. Not that anyone cared to cross, as Mortasia had always been known as a land flourishing with disease and famine. Diseases said to wreak havoc on blood magic, which made it illegal by order of the king to breach the boundary. What could possibly exist in the land of death, old man? I do not know. I only know my visions are never wrong. He kicked back a long swill of his drink and wiped his mouth on the back of his hand. Whatever blood I find there will have no power. It would be useless. Not useless. Even without magic, blood is life. Life is what the scepter requires. The 7th bloodline might very well be mortal. A mere mortal, for all we know. Dolian threw back another sip, his dark brown skin reddening by the moment, and he signaled for another drink from the barmaid. No one knows entirely what, or whom, the 7th bloodline originated from. It's a mystery that to this day baffles the magehood, but the moment it is reunited with the other stones, its true power will be known. And once in hand, I will possess the most impressive scepter in all of Etheria, far more powerful than Sablefire. Seems like a lot of power for one man, perhaps, but a necessary one. I've told you what I've seen. Yes, a plague. Courtesy of Kadavros, Zivander said in an unimpressed tone, hoping the mage wouldn't break into one of his long tirades again. Except Kadavros is dead. Long dead. The evil that had bestowed the curse upon Zivander had long been extinguished, destroyed by the king himself, or so the annals went on to say anyway. You believe what they tell you, Litalis? Fortunately for him, he spoke the word, low enough that Zivander didn't feel the need to rip his tongue out for having said it aloud. And it isn't a simple plague. Creatures, the likes of which we've never seen, will ravage our villages. Insects will spill from the mouths of children. The citadel will burn. Is it not these ravines that got you kicked out of the magehood? Kadavros will return. The black pestilence is coming. I promised you that. He will bring famine and death. He slammed down his tankard, and a quick glance around showed the few still left in the tavern stared back at them. Dolian cleared his throat and sat back in the booth. Another furtive glance, and all those curious eyes turned away. Zivander fought to contain the mocking remark, itching to break free. Look, I don't give a good fuck what you do with those stones, so long as you pay me what's promised. And if you're lying about it, let's just say it'll be worth breaking some laws to watch you suffer. I resent your insults. Resent all you like, but don't fuck with me. Did you bring what I asked? Dolian reached into the pocket of his vest and tugged out a milky white substance that sparkled in the lamplight. Pure vivicantum. While the stone he'd taken from the high blood could have provided enough vivicantum to last a good month or two, the liquid form was much easier to consume, and the measured dose ensured he wouldn't absorb too much of it. Too much was toxic, and turning the stones to liquid was a power only a select few were granted permission by the king to carry out. Those same few were required to live on castle grounds, guarded by the Imperial Army. Given the protections and restrictions of the men guarding the vein, along with those who mined it, how Dolian came about acquiring the vial was a mystery that Zivander didn't bother to question. It isn't laced with anything, is it? Straight from the vein. Good. Zvander tipped his head back and squeezed a half-dropper full onto his tongue. Cold tingles rippled through his body, casting a shiver down his back, and he let out a grunt as the liquid sent a burst of pleasure to his muscles. Too much resulted in poisoning, and poisoning led to madness. One half-dropper of pure vivicantum would last a week. Zvander tucked the remaining supply away into his leathers. The stones he'd scavenged from the ashes, not meant to be consumed in rock form, would prove useful in other ways. Mortesia. Dolian stared down at his drink. It is said to be dangerous, a wasteland of suffering and death. Trying to talk me out of it, are you? Of course not. It is the only way. But should you fail? Zvander hiked an elbow on the back of the wooden booth. Have I failed you yet? No, you've done well, and your reward will be freedom from the flame. The elder mage reached into his coat and fished out a small scrawl that sat in his outstretched palm. There are only 3 high mages in all of Etheria who know this Canterfell. The spell for the ward, not entirely sought out by the Etherians, who'd sooner fling themselves into a vat of molten lava than cross into the mortal lands. And you're the lucky third? Frowning, Zvander opened the miniature scrawl to view ancient words written in black ink. He recognized enough of the old language to know it was a passage spell. I trust you can speak it? Dolian asked, tapping his finger impatiently against the tabletop. My mother was Vespiri, born of the ancients. Yes, I can speak it. He rolled it back up and tucked it away in his pocket beside the vial. Good. Dolian leaned back in his chair, chin cocked indignantly. In my vision, I can see a forest from a bedroom window, an archway made of bones. Zvander groaned and shook his head. You better not be sending me on a long trek through the mortal lands for this one. I can count on you to retrieve the stone then. Retrieving it meant boiling the blood of a victim into a hardened mass, which they expelled out of their mouths before the body combusted into a cloud of black dust, something the overzealous mage couldn't seem to bring himself to say. You're asking me to venture beyond the boundary, a crime punishable by execution, and retrieve the stone from what has only ever been described as hell? Zvander rolled his shoulders back. Of course, I want this fucking fire out of my veins. What does it feel like? The black flame, the power of Etheria's most dangerous element at your fingertips? The intrigue in his eyes sickened Zvander. Much as they, the high and holy mages, denounced the power, they were always intrigued by it. Imagine your cock in the hands of a pyro mage, only it's your whole fucking body. He didn't bother to smile as the older man winced at the visual. I'll caution again. You attempt trickery, and I'll personally see to it that you know exactly what it feels like to burn from the inside out. Grabbing his sword from beside him, Zvander pushed to his feet and strapped it beneath his cloak, then exited the tavern, noting the hooded stranger no longer sat at the booth. Chapter 8. Maveth. The sensation of sharp needles piercing my arm roused me from sleep, and I lifted it into the dappled rays of moonlight streaming through the window beside me. Noticing a strange blackness bleeding through the bandage where I'd cut myself, a sickening cold filled my chest. I hissed a shaky breath and unwound the sticky bandage to find an oozing wound on my arm beneath. Oh no. Angry red flesh surrounded the gash, and the veins branching out pulsed a distressing silver with each beat of my heart. Silver? A cold panic crawled over my chest as I stared down at the abnormal color beneath my skin. Deep red drainage leaked from crusty edges, and when I lifted it to my nose, the stench of it tugged a gag from my throat. I pressed on the corner of the wound, and a thick black substance swirled through with what looked like whirls of molten silver oozed out of it. Gurgling in my stomach had me breathing hard through my nose to stifle the urge to retch. As a child, I'd had the silly notion that I'd one day become a physician. Ridiculous, seeing as women weren't permitted to study medicine. But I hadn't known any better. It turned out to be a futile ambition on my part when I discovered I had a weak stomach for blood and death. And what grave misfortune that, of all places, I'd end up living in a mortuary. "Help!" A frantic scream broke me from my thoughts, sounding like it echoed from the vent. I turned to see my sister's bed stood empty. "Please, someone help me!" The voice arrived again, the intensity heightening to panic. "Elysia!" I shot out of bed, wrapping my wound as I crossed the room toward the door, which I cracked open to find a dark and empty corridor. The pictures of my grandfather's relatives added an eerie feel, like eyes watching me as I made my way down the staircase. "Please, someone." "Oh God," the voice cried out again, though I didn't entirely recognize it as my sister's. "Elysia?" I whispered as I stepped lightly down the staircase to the lower level. "I'm begging you. Please, stop." The voice goaded me through the kitchen, washroom, and pantry, only to find nothing but stillness in each room. From the front of the house, a thumping sound drew my feet closer to the viewing parlor. Tiptoeing toward the entryway, I followed the sound and rounded the wall. On the other side stood Uncle Rifton, pressed against my sister, her head thrown back, bottom lip caught between her teeth. A twinge of alarm spiraled down my neck, and he turned toward me, his lips stretched to a grin just before he captured my sister's bare breast between his lips, never bothering to turn his gaze away from me. Violent ripples of mortification pulsed through me, and I shuffled back around the wall before my sister could notice, wanting to scrub my eyeballs with soap and salt. "Oh, gods be damned," I muttered as I made my way back up to my room. It was then I noticed the cries I'd heard before had stopped. Certainly not my sister's cries, with the risk of Agatha finding the two of them. If not Elysia, then who had called out for help? Once back in my room, I paused by the vent, listening again. Nothing. Had I imagined it? Had my mind somehow conjured that sound? Once settled in bed again, I turned toward the window, willing myself to erase the visual of Uncle Rifton cornering Elysia's body against the wall, his pants pulled at his ankles, their naked limbs tangled around each other. The jarring shock of it still had my heart pounding in my chest. I'd never been with a boy that way before, not fully penetrated at least, though I did have a crush on one of the boys from my parish, slightly older, the son of a miner, strong and handsome. The day before he left to fight for the Vancovian army, he'd walked me home from the village square, where I'd gone to feed Mrs. Cholmsley some stale bread and dried fruits. Along a wooded stretch of road, he'd asked if I'd ever been touched by a boy before. When I'd told him I hadn't, he said he'd never touched a girl either. He asked if I'd allow him one small touch before he left for war, and I'd said yes. Right there on a deserted road, I lifted my skirt and let him touch me in that forbidden place. Had anyone caught us, we'd have been beaten for it. Or worse. Still, I savored the feel of his strong hands on my most delicate flesh. No rumors between us. No scorn or crooked faces judging us. Just a curious boy and girl. I distinctly remembered his eyes, heavy with lust, as he slid his fingers inside of me. Eyes that had dulled, vacant and lifeless, when he'd returned from Leveria, laid out on the concrete slab in Uncle Felix's examination room, with his throat cut open. While a feeling of sorrow had filled my chest, I couldn't help the envy he'd stirred. What freedom he must have felt when he'd closed his eyes and drifted out of that mangled body. I never once spoke of our encounter, not even to Elysia, who would have taken that secret to the grave. As much as I loathed the nature of her relationship with our uncle, I'd do the same for her. At the click of the door, I dared not look to see what I was certain was Elysia making her way back to her bed. Ungraceful footsteps clunked across the room, and I frowned at her blatant disregard. Cluck, clunk, cluck, clunk, cluck, clunk. Frustrated with her, I turned over in bed. Do you have to be so? A cold, wet hand pressed to my mouth, and a scream ripped from my throat as I stared up at the horrid creature standing over my bed, whose pale, gaunt face carried a shadow of terror. The man from the banishing earlier. He released my mouth, leaving behind a sticky wetness that clung to my lips, prodding me to wipe it away. But my muscles wouldn't move. Not even my lungs, which held my last drawn breath. He lifted a shiny, skinless finger to his lips, quieting me. Half of his face had been torn away to raw flesh and bits of bone. Hysterics gripped my chest, allowing only small, panting breaths as I lay staring up at him, studying his ghastly features. The door clicked again. Behind the man, I watched Elysia pad toward her bed, not sparing him a single glance. On passing, she smiled at me. "Oh, I thought you were asleep." Trembling, I turned only slightly to see the man still standing there, while my sister approached him from behind. Not an ounce of hesitation in her step, as if she couldn't see him at all. She practically waltzed right up alongside him. The sight of the two standing side by side left me paralyzed in disbelief. What was this madness? "Do you not see him?" I wanted to say, but I couldn't summon a single word. "Are you all right?" "You look pale." Elysia reached down to draw her thumb over my mouth and frowned down at her finger. Wiping whatever it was away on her skirt, she rounded the bed, walking right through the man, who wavered in a cloud of black smoke. An illusion. It had to be an awful, terrifying illusion. An intense burn at my arm flared again, and without thinking, I lifted it, unwittingly drawing Elysia's attention there. "Dear God, Maeve, what happened?" She held my arm in her hands, the same hands I'd seen pinned to the wall by Uncle Rifton only moments before. As she did so, the figure of the banishing man faded out of view, offering a small bit of relief to the turmoil churning in my gut. I finally spoke. I cut it. On what? I didn't answer at first, my head still searching for reason, answers for what had just happened. "Maeve, how did you cut your arm?" I couldn't tell her how it had happened. While Elysia certainly didn't buy into the religious nonsense and superstition, she still feared that forest as much as anyone else. I don't. I lifted the back of my free hand to my lips that were still sticky and wet. "You don't what?" "Please leave me alone about it." I wrenched my arm from her grasp, immediately regretting my tone. But for God's sake, if she requested a physician on my behalf, there was a good chance I'd lose my arm on precaution alone. "You do look pale. Is it possible that it might be infected?" I don't know. I washed it, Lifting my head, I scanned the room, making sure the man from before was gone. Truly gone. I'm just tired. "Will you let me look at it?" Absolutely not. One look would surely make her worry. It had made me worry. "You're not a physician. What good would having you look at it do me?" "I'm your sister. I want to make sure you're all right." "I'm fine." I turned over in my bed, wanting nothing more than to wipe my head of the terrifying visual that still plagued me. "Please, I just need some sleep. You'll tell me if it gets worse, won't you, Maeve? It's like you said earlier, we need to stick together." If only that were true, I muttered under my breath. "What does that mean?" "You know exactly what it means. I saw you and Uncle Rifton, and be grateful it was me and not Agatha, because you'd surely find yourself standing before that forest with the Boncobian soldiers prodding your back." An unnerving quiet settled between us, one that lasted too long, and I wondered if I should have kept my observations to myself. When she finally spoke, she said, "I'm sorry you saw us." Despite the emotion I could hear in her voice, I still couldn't bring myself to look at her. "What are you thinking, Elysia?" "I'm thinking that I love him." I turned over in hopes I'd see instant regret on her face, for having admitted such a thing. Are you mad? Are you so glutton for Agatha's wrath that you can't help yourself? We're careful. I didn't have to respond to that the way she instantly lowered her gaze from mine. Most of the time. You can never marry him, nor have children, unless you run to the farthest reaches of this God-forsaken continent. And what life would that be beyond the reach of civilization? Better than here, but we'd take you with us. She rested a hand on my shoulder, and I wanted to grab and squeeze it into a mess as mangled as my heart. Damn her for always making complications so unbearably complex. I've already spoken to Uncle Rifton about it. He'll take us both. Both? Had she lost her senses? No, I won't. You'd stay here and marry a man 3 times your age. One who undoubtedly longs for an heir like every other man in this parish. The thought of that twisted my guts, but no worse than the vision of us 3 roaming the barren lands beyond Vonkovia and Liveria, to the Arctic reaches beyond Grimvale, or the scorching deserts of Roma Seer, the only place the Vonkovian soldiers wouldn't bother to hunt us down, because every other creature that dwelled there surely would. What do you want me to do? You think I asked to fall in love with him? You're the eldest, Elysia. You're the one who's supposed to have the level head. She spat a mirthless chuckle. So I come live with you and Mr. Moros in your elaborate manner, staring the man in the eye every day as he rapes you for an heir? Or worse, stay and let Agatha find a man to break me. I agreed with her. Every option was unappealing. I don't have a solution. I only know that I don't trust Uncle Rifton to follow through. You don't know him like I do. I'm certain of that. I rolled back over, facing the window again. Your love blinds you. I suppose you'd have to know the love of a man to understand. As stinging as her words might have been, she was right. Behind my ribs stood a graveyard of empty caskets, a chest full of nameless tombstones, an emptiness which afforded me a small measure of clarity that she refused to acknowledge. And I think you're the greatest fool I've ever known. Another long bout of silence lingered between us, and I glanced over my shoulder in time to see her wipe a tear from her cheek. It was rare that Elysia or I ever shed tears. Our lives, so entwined with pain and sadness, made crying seem pointless. She lifted the blanket, and despite my protesting stiffness and refusal to move, urged me over, just as when we were little, before sliding her hand over my hip and curling herself into my back. Sing for me, Maeve, just like you used to. I'm not in the singing mood. The stench of forbidden sex clung to her skin, clogging my throat. Please. Your voice always settled my mind. If only my voice had the power to make her realize how foolish she was for falling in love with our uncle. I don't want to sing. Vermutahe? It was a song written in the old language, roughly translated to, "Go, my darling." The first time I'd ever heard the song was the night I'd stumbled upon my father, tucked away in grandfather's cellar, sobbing. I'd come to realize, after everyone had gone to bed, he'd sometimes retired there, in the depths of the cottage, singing the song as he drank Moranberry wine, mourning his dead wife. I'd learned the words to the song in the common tongue, in hopes that I'd work up the courage to sing with him some night. But I never had the opportunity between his deployments to Liveria and his eventual disappearance. With reluctance, I sang the song she loved. For her. Fingers gripping my shoulders, she nuzzled close as I reached the chorus and stared out the window beside me, up toward the stars. Go, my darling, unto that place where magic still exists, beyond the confines of this cruel world, as you will not be missed. Instead, I'll find you in a dream, or a wistful plea on stars. Hours of suffering no more redeemed, for eternity is ours. At the end of the mournful dirge, Elysia kissed my cheek, then padded back to her bed. I tucked my burning arm beneath the blankets, mentally willing myself to ignore the pain. In the silence of my thoughts, I drifted deeper and deeper into the abyss. Chapter 9. Zvander. Just outside the Black Salt Tavern, Zvander paused, listening, only the rustle of dried leaves drifting over the cobblestones. Eyes and ears perked. He scanned over his surroundings, not bothering to call on his horse quite yet. He clicked his tongue, the sound bouncing off nearby objects. A number of Lunasir possessed the ability to echolocate as a hunting technique, but Zvander had honed the skill over the years. The image in his mind showed only the spindling boy from earlier, who'd watched him from the shadows. Zvander lifted a finger to his masked lips to ensure the boy remained quiet, to which the boy nodded and returned the gesture. The child then pointed in the opposite direction. The mark of the scorpion that had been branded into Zvander's flesh stirred a quiet hum as he strode down the empty street in the direction the boy had sent him. He could sense the stranger. Near. Zvander slowed his steps a few buildings down from the tavern and turned into an alley. He paused again to listen, and his keen hearing picked up on the slightest tremble of breath, the stink of ale beneath the rot that carried on the air. Prickling vibrations of fear radiated from a shadow beside him. In as subtle a movement as he could muster, he unlatched the scorpion dagger beneath his cloak and set his hand on the hilt. The shadow shifted like black smoke and took form, winding into the shape of the hooded man from the tavern. A black tendril lashed out at Zvander, but before it could wrap around his throat as intended, Zvander struck fast with his blade, cleaving it away. At a pained outcry, the black vapor dropped to the ground and morphed into a severed hand and forearm. The hooded stranger held up a bloody and trembling stump. Color drained from his face as he stared at the wound in shock. And Zvander struck twice more, across his mouth, the other across his throat. Gurgling, the stranger fell to his knees and hit the pavement face first, where he stilled. Zvander knelt beside him and pulled back the cloak to check the back of his neck. Bestowed at birth, the stranger's sigil, the primitive symbol of the Suveri bloodline, glowed a bright blue across his nape, the same symbol worn by the man Zvander had killed a fortnight ago by order of the king. He'd been a blood mage who ran an unauthorized business of crafting serotonics, potent poisons that held the power to taint the blood and destroy an entire bloodline. No doubt the stranger had sought revenge for his slain kin. Zvander tore away his glove and raised his hand, sending a blast of sable fire that caught on the stranger's cape, devouring him in a matter of seconds. It burned so intensely that the pile of remaining ash was small enough to kick to the wind. He plucked the resulting bloodstone from the soot and pocketed it. Not that the stone was useful or valuable, he simply didn't want to leave any trace of the stranger behind. And just like that, the unwitting avenger was gone, not a shred of evidence that he'd ever existed. Though, Zvander had grown fucking weary of the attempts on his life, the constant need to look over his shoulder. While his identity remained unknown for the most part, an occasional few managed to find him. Unfortunately for them, they never lived to carry out their vengeance. The sound of shouts and clanging metal reached his ears, and Zvander turned back out of the alley. Halfway between himself and the tavern, the man who bore the predator tattoo fought to shove the young, spindling boy into a cage at the back of his horse-drawn wagon. The boy kicked and shouted, his skinny arms threaded through the bars of the cramped enclosure. Most would have looked the other way. Even the Imperial Guard wouldn't have spared a spindling boy a second glance. In their minds, it was one less spindling on the street. The boy would feed the man's cravings and keep him away from their own children. Unfortunately for the heedless Rapax, a bigger predator prowled closer. The tattoos hidden beneath Zvander's leathers seeped through the coverings like black smoke and gathered in his palm, taking the shape of a black scorpion the size of a plum. The man slowly straightened his posture as the Latalis approached, clearly uncertain whether or not he'd dare to intervene. Most didn't. "You've got no business here," the boy's abductor said, raising his palm in threat. "I'm warning you, go on now." Not a single glyph marred his palm. The wily bastard might have possessed blood magic, but he certainly hadn't mastered any of his power. The stranger spun away from Zvander, but before he could take so much as a step in the other direction, Zvander released the scorpion onto the ground, and it grew to the size of a melon as it shot across the wet cobblestones after him. With little effort, the scorpion caught his ankle, its tail winding around his legs, and its razor-sharp stinger thrashed and slammed down into the man's groin. The outcry that followed would have surely drawn a crowd in any other part of the city. Zvander strode toward the writhing abductor, passing the boy who trembled and clung to the bars of his cage. The scorpion kept its hold of the stranger's cock, while the shook and batted it with an unsteady hand. "Get it off me. Get it the fuck off me." Zvander reached for the scorpion, and it finally released the man on a spray of blood before slithering its way up the sleeve of his tunic. The sting carries a poison that will ensure you never know pleasure again. Each time your cock fills with blood, all you will know is a pain that will have you begging for death. Without another word, he left the man, cupping his mutilated groin, squirming and sobbing on the ground, and swiped up the keys the abductor had dropped in his attempt to escape. A blast of heat radiated across Zvander's back, and, frowning, he turned in time to see a tendril of black flame slithering from his boot, across the gravelly ground, toward the suffering kidnapper. His muscles lurched to reel it back in, but before he could so much as raise his hand, the flame consumed the man, who screamed and gurgled in the mere seconds before his body turned to ash. Fuck. Teeth grinding, he lifted his palm, calling the fire back, but instead of following his command, it streaked across the ground toward the boy in his cage. "No!" Zvander took hold of the power with both hands as it thrashed and snapped at the air, fighting to break free to swallow up another life. He hauled it hand over hand, winding it back, fingers cramping with his tight grip, until, at last, the flame retreated, scampering up his sleeve and back beneath his skin. With palms pressed to his knees, he stood doubled over, each deep, burning inhalation crackling in his lungs as the flame settled inside of him. He let out a groan. While episodes like these, during which he'd sometimes lost control of the flame, were relatively rare, it was enough to trouble him, a testament to the unruly and unpredictable nature of his power. After collecting the new bloodstone left behind and tucking it into his pocket alongside that from earlier, he unlocked the cage, freeing the boy, and kept on toward the tavern. A pattering sound at his back had him turning around to find the boy running after him, fastening the pants that slipped over his too thin hips. Zvander kept on and whistled for his horse, a cursed stallion who was as dark as pitch, a breed only found on the harsh and violent plains of Draconesia. The clack of its hooves reached Zvander through the darkness, and it came to a halt before him, its eyes as black as coal and fangs dripping with the blood of a recent kill. "I see you've been busy," Zvander said as he climbed onto the saddle, and to his dismay, he found the spindling standing alongside the horse. "Your master is dead. You're free to return to your family." The boy lowered his head, his shirtless body trembling with the cold. "No family, my lord. 7 fucking hells." Zvander held out his hand, and a blast of radiant heat engulfed the boy, leaving his body no longer shivering, skin red with the warmth that would last him through the night. "Find some shelter and stay out of trouble." With that, he gave a light kick to the beast's flank and sent it on a lazy walk. Up the street and 2 over put him on the path toward the hovel, situated on the seediest outskirts of Costelwick, farthest from the citadel. Highbloods wouldn't dare venture to that part of town, where disease ran rampant and death waited in the shadows. a strange sensation tickled the back of his neck, and he turned to see the boy running after him, his spindly arms struggling to hold up his pants. Zavander groaned and turned his attention back to the road ahead. He set his horse to a mild trot in hopes the kid would give up the chase. Through the gates of the city, a stretch of weathered shacks supplanted the once artisanal beauty of Costelwick's most flourishing district that was now a faded and chipped remnant of its former self. Flickering gas lamps casted shadows on the decayed brick buildings and across the damp and winding cobblestone streets, where the haunting whispers of desperation echoed from the alleyways. Zavander removed his mask. Hiding his face wasn't necessary in this part of the city. Nearly everyone in the hovel bore scars in one form or another, and no one cared who he was or what he'd been cursed with. It was only the hideous scar that stretched across his cheek and branched into tiny black veins down his jaw and neck that still garnered stares, even in the worst corners of Costelwick. The air was thick with sanitation fog, an enchanted mist that the high-bloods released over the hovel to keep their diseases contained. Fortunately for Zavander, the flame inside of him burned away disease and infection, making him immune to just about anything he might have encountered. An approaching wagon kept a slow cadence toward him. Mortemian, death collectors for the city. The coachman sat hunched over, undoubtedly weary from a long day of gathering the dead. A leather tarp stretched across the back of the wagon and covered the bodies held within, bound for the vein. While Nyxuros boasted a high rate of immortality, the poverty-stricken villages on the outskirts tended to skew the numbers, which was ultimately good for the king. More bodies equated to more vivicantum, after all. While the sable fire contained within the vein had the power to transform flesh into bloodstones in a matter of seconds, it took approximately 7 years for a corpse to phase into the much-needed nutrient that was then harvested from the rock. For centuries, the high-blood immortals had relied on the sickly Nilevir and Spindlings to ensure a long and successful bloodline. Zavander stopped his horse in front of a brothel and dismounted. As he slipped his mask into one of the satchels of his saddle, movement caught the corner of his eye, and he twisted to see that damned boy running barefoot toward him. En route to the hovel, Zavander had slowed his pace, thinking he'd lost the kid, but it seemed he'd kept on him. Dragging a hand down his face, he groaned again, and as he stepped in the direction of the brothel, the boy fell into step after him. Zavander swung around, pressing a gloved finger into the Spindling's chest. "Stay. You can watch my horse." The boy gave a spirited nod and scampered to the mount, where he gently petted its chest. On a huff of frustration, Zavander strode up to the once grand house that had since stood dilapidated and in decay, its roof bowing and wood rotting, a place of dark fantasies. Beyond the door, a curtain of perfume clung to the air, masking the heady stench of pleasure. Sex cells, clad in ornate corsets, lounged across settees and couches, the curvy beauties primed and ready. After the shot of vivicantum, Zavander should have been all too willing to accommodate them, every one of them. Instead, he felt only indifference to their half-naked forms lying about. After all, he hadn't come to the brothel for sex. A voluptuous woman, breasts spilling over a black corset, sauntered up to him, her red hair wild and cascading over slim shoulders. To most, she went by Madame Lazarine, but Zavander had known her intimately enough to call her Zakira. "Well, hello, handsome. Haven't seen you in a while." "Where is she?" The woman's face soured. "You're not taking her again, are you? We just got her back. She's our best girl. I'm sure you'll find another to take her place. My lord, please, I'm begging you. We are a clean and safe establishment, the best in the hovel." He strode past her for the staircase. "Be that as it may, she's coming home with me. She alone will bring in enough coin tonight to keep mouths fed." Pausing his ascent, Zavander reached into a small satchel hooked to his belt and tossed her a silver coin. Capturing it in her palm, she stared down at it and back to him. A Keltzig, she'll make at least 3 times as much. He fished for 2 more and tossed them to the woman. "Where is she?" he asked, already making his way up the staircase. "Last room on the left, just finished up." At the top of the staircase, he found an older man fucking a brunette against the wall, and he stepped past the two, catching her leering stare. Moans bled through the doors he passed, the thumping of beds against the walls keeping time with his strides. When he finally reached the end of the hallway, he knocked on the door. "Give me a minute, will you?" A familiar voice, laced with the telling slur of the Mandrowild tonic she'd taken, came from the other side. Pressing his ear to the wooden panel, he listened, and at the sound of a heavy thud, he slammed through the door and found Rakaya passed out on the couch. On the coffee table lay the evidence of what he feared. The substances she'd consumed, set out in small, black vials. The white gown she wore carried the remnants of blood, and he lifted her arm for the fresh scars, undoubtedly put there by one of her Johns. Unbeknownst to some brothel keepers, clients sometimes enjoyed the practice of fire bleeding, making small cuts into the woman's flesh and sprinkling flammapool onto their tongues that they dragged over the bleeding wounds. Once in the bloodstream, the flammapool caused slight paralysis and tightening of the muscles, including the pelvic muscles. For the sex cell, it was a terrifying circumstance that made them exceptionally vulnerable. For the client, he could do whatever he wanted and manipulate their blood magic for as long as the high lasted. Most Johns paid for hours at a time, not only to take advantage of the tonic, but to allow it time to wear off. Zvander lifted the vial from the coffee table. Raptasy, a sleeping tonic by trade, but abusers of the elixir enjoyed the effects that turned them happy and horny just before falling asleep. She'd been using it for quite some time, and it might have been the reason someone as strong-willed as Rakaya could have fallen victim to the flammapool. Another dark ampule beside it, vermicide, ensured she wouldn't have felt the thing or had any awareness of her surroundings. He pulled the small vial of vivicantum from his pocket and filled the dropper to the halfway mark. Taking hold of her jaw, Zvander tipped her head back and squeezed the fluid into her mouth. Pure vivicantum in the blood acted as a powerful stimulant for the unconscious, essentially banishing the toxins from the body. At first, she didn't move, but then her throat bobbed and her eyes shot open on a gasp. Rakaya turned over in time to expel a torrent of vomit that landed on the gritty floor. Fingers clutching the cushion of the couch, she heaved and retched as the mix of tonics exited her body. With the back of a shaky hand, she wiped the stringy bits from her lips, and the moment she glanced upward, she rolled her eyes. "What brings you here, brother? I'm taking you home. And if I refuse?" Zvander tipped his head, brow cocked. She knew the answer to that. He'd carry her out, kicking and screaming, the way he had the last time she'd left home. And the time before that. "Please don't make me go back. You have no idea what it's like." He lifted her arm, turning it over for the cuts. "And this is better? Who did this?" Frowning, she ran her fingers over the wounds, undoubtedly unaware they'd been placed there in her drugged stupor. What had made her such a coveted choice at the brothel was, although her magic was weak in her drugged state, she possessed the ability to absorb pain and emotions. For the depressed, the stressed, the physically tormented, she served as something of a tonic herself, allowing a moment when they might experience sheer ecstasy and bliss for the first time in their lives. Pain eaters, her kind were called, as they literally consumed the agony with a particular touch or kiss. It was hell for Rakaya, whose mind somehow had to process all that grief and suffering, the aches and injury, the weight of which had prompted her to abuse tonics at an early age. "I don't remember. So what does it matter?" What matters is that one day, your client is going to take his blade across your throat, and by the gods, I would burn him alive for it. I want a name. Who cut you? She huffed, reaching for a small glass that held an amber fluid, nectartium, or nectar of the gods. I couldn't tell you. She answered dismissively. Her insouciance grated on him, and he ground his teeth. Tell me, or I'll see to it you're locked in the dungeons. You would do such a thing, wouldn't you? His patience snapped, and he swiped the glass out of her hand and chucked it against the wall, where it crashed into tiny shards. On a huff of a laugh, she leaned back, resting her arm on the back of the couch. Feel better? That tiny bit of liquor costs a fucking quarter Keldzeg. Tell me now. I don't know. I fucking lost my wits and everything turned black. I don't know his name, nor his face. It's entirely wiped out of my head. The rapid blinking of her eyes failed to hold back the tears welling in them. I never forget a face, ever. But I cannot summon a single image for who may have done this. It's peculiar, and to be honest, terrifying. Pack your things and let's go. Tears spilled down her cheek. There's nothing for me back at Eidolon Zabander. I cannot live within those walls with the memories I carry. The pain that suffocates me every time I walk past that room. Though he hadn't been present for the trauma that plagued his sister, the pangs of guilt cut him inside. Still, as empathetic as he longed to be toward her, it infuriated him to see her destroying herself on potions and tonics that so often rendered her completely unconscious, vulnerable. Ones that chipped away at her body every time she consumed them. Ones that, if taken in just the right dosage, could easily stop her heart. "Am I carrying you then?" he asked in a flat, unsympathetic tone. She rubbed a hand down her face and expelled a forced breath. "Fine. I'll go, and we will find ourselves back in this very place once I've grown weary of being locked away in that dreaded castle, mere hours from now, mind you. And I will be here to carry you back home. You are a tyrant, and you're a pain in the ass. Aren't you weary of this, Zabander? Haven't you grown tired of watching over me like a beastly nursemaid?" At a knock on the door, Zabander turned to see an older man, dressed in a fine brocade jacket that told him he was from the high-blood neighborhood where the wealthy resided. In one hand, he clutched a pair of shackles. In the other, a bottle of liquor undoubtedly meant to ply Rakaya. The sight of him stirred Zabander's rage. The stranger's eyes seemed riveted on Zabander's throat, where his sigil undoubtedly rippled with brewing anger. "Zabander, don't," Rakaya urged. But with fisted hands, her brother strode toward the door, his power lashing through him like a blazing whip. The older man skittered off, stumbling as he made his way back down the staircase. Zabander watched him, the fury still hammering in his muscles, and he turned to his sister. "Gather your things. Now." As she reached for the black vials, he took a step toward her. "Not those. I need them. I'll be sick. Leave them. No. You do well to remember you're not my father." Growling, Zabander strode toward her and gathered her flailing arms to lift his much smaller sister off the couch by her waist. Stretching forward over his arm, she reached for the vials. He denied her. "Let me go. Let me go, you tyrannical brute." She screamed, wriggling and kicking as he carried her down the staircase toward where Zakira waited, her long cigarette perched from the ring holder on her finger. Zabander stopped alongside her, his patience snapping like a thread as he wrangled his sister's arm and held it out toward the redhead. "Is this your idea of clean and safe?" The woman's eyes widened, then seemed to sadden as she ran a painted nail gently over the wounds. "Release me!" Rakaya howled, squirming in his grip. "I'm sorry!" "I had no idea. Please believe me, Zabander. I would never put her at risk that way." "You will never put her at risk again. She won't be coming back. I will, I swear." Rakaya's words were cut short by Zabander's palm pressed against her mouth. If whoever did this returns, you will let me know, Zabander said through clenched teeth. Yes, of course. As he strode toward the door, the spindling boy appeared there, his minuscule form hardly blocking his path. God spit, Zabander muttered, and shoved his hand into his pocket for more coin that he tossed to Zakira. Give the boy shelter. I swear on all of the unholy. If you don't let me go, brother, I will bite your damn ear off. As Rakaya wriggled and squirmed, he tightened his grip, ignoring her. I'm not some charitable poorhouse, Zakira argued, casually leaning against the wall. This is a brothel, Zabander. No place for a boy. It wasn't. But most didn't visit Madame Lazarin's brothel for young spindlings. They came for the busty women with wet tongues and silky hands, who sweet-talked them out of coin. Better than what he'll be subjected to out on those streets. Come, boy. Rakaya reached toward the spindling in the doorway. Come here. I'll give you all the coin I have to come kick this beast as hard as you can in the groin. The spindling glanced up at Zabander, whose expression must have been grave enough to have him frantically shaking his head in response. You are positively demonic. May the gods rain down. Quiet, Rakaya, Zabander barked, his patience wearing thin. I will not quiet. She kicked his flank. You are. She kicked him again. Not my father. At her third attempt, Zabander shifted her in his arms, hoisting her over his shoulder. With the tonics and liquor she'd consumed, the pressure in her sinuses would keep her from screaming at least. Release me. Please. I'm begging, brother. I'm begging. Again, he ignored her pleas. That's enough coin to rent a room for the month. Zakira glanced down at it again, as if only just realizing that. And what am I to do with a spindling child running around? I'm sure you can dream up some tasks for him. I'll let him stay no more than a week, no more. Good enough. Come, darling, help me with my tea. Shoulders back, she reached a hand out toward the spindling. What is your name? The boy looked to Zabander, as if unsure, but at the Latalis's nod, he followed after the woman. Kavrush, he answered, taking her hand. With that, Zabander dragged his kicking and screaming sister out of the brothel and into the cold. Chapter 10, Maveth. Cold, so cold. Every muscle in my body trembled. I lifted the covers higher, up to my nose, and buried my head in the thick quilt. The heat of my breath deflected back to my face, an infernal warmth, but not enough. My chest expanded with a hollow cold that stirred a nauseous twisting in my gut. I wanted to call out to Elysia, but I didn't dare. Instead, I breathed into the blanket, beads of sweat trailing down my temple and neck. My heartbeat throbbed in my arm, pulsing in agonizing pain. Lifting it proved difficult, like trying to lift a heavy log, my muscles useless. I couldn't bring myself to look at it for fear of what festered beneath the wet bandages. Would I die? Could I die from such a thing? The question followed me into darkness. Is it a bite? The sound of Agatha's voice roused me from oblivion. It doesn't appear to be, a man answered. Uncle Felix, I guessed, though it was difficult to discern over the pounding of blood in my ears. It seems she might have scratched it somehow. It's a scratch. She told me so, Elysia answered. And I wanted so badly to tell her to be quiet, not to say a word to either of them. But my eyes refused to open, and my voice remained trapped in my throat. Hush, girl, Agatha snapped. She cannot lose the arm. She'll be worthless. Best you can do is wait and see then. If it gets worse, we may have to amputate. The most I'd heard Uncle Felix say in all the time I'd known him. The most horrific words he could have possibly spoken. Screams, horrible screams echoed inside my head. A young girl wearing what looked like animal hide reached for an older woman, who lay motionless on the ground, in a pool of thick blood. The girl cried and wriggled in the arms of a man dressed in armor, like the age of old. I watched him carry her to the edge of the world, where nothing but a thick white mist stood beyond the rock. The young girl's cries turned hysterical, and she clawed at the metal of his suit in futility. With little care, he threw her small body over the edge of the rock. A flash of black swooped down from the sky toward me. I saw my reflection in the shiny black eye of a raven. Blinding brightness pounded against my eyelids, and I turned over with a groan. Painfully luminous, it had my eyeballs aching and my head throbbing. A cold sting pulsed through my arm, and with a whimper, I took in the state of my bandage, profusely soaked in black blood. Worse than the night before. A strange metallic scent, not like rot or infection, struck the back of my throat while I unwound the dirty gauze. When I finally reached the end of the wrapping, I paused, confusion clamoring through my already aching head. The wound had closed, the skin contractured and pulled together into a fully healed scar, the edges of which glowed a strange silver. I ran my fingertip over it, noting the slight hum beneath my skin where I touched. The marking seemed to have a deliberate shape, though it wasn't until I turned my head a slight bit that I noticed the way the skin had tightened around the wound, like veins to a roused, giving it the appearance of a feather. How peculiar. It didn't hurt. I no longer felt the delirium or heat of a fever. I sat up, noticing Elysia's bed empty and made. Squinting against the light, I rested my palm against the ache in my left eyeball and stumbled out of bed toward the dresser. In the mirror's reflection, my skin seemed paler than before, if that were even possible. I lowered my hand from my face and jumped back on a gasp. The lower part of my iris, ordinarily a deep winter gray, had paled to an icy silver. I leaned in, my fingertips skimming just below my eye, and studied the aberration that almost appeared like a metallic fleck stuck to my eye. Thank God you're awake. Elysia's voice shot a startling jolt through my muscles, and I nearly poked myself in the eye. Thank the ever-loving and merciful God. Merciful God. Since when had she begun crediting him for anything? I turned just as she crashed into me, wrapping her arms around me. I thought we lost you. The tears in her voice had me frowning. What had gotten into her? As she straightened herself, I covered my strange eye to keep her from seeing it. You've slept so long. Yeah, I had a hard time falling asleep last night. Kept waking up in the night after you went back to your own bed. Face painted in confusion, she shook her head. After I went back to my own bed? Maeve, that was 4 nights ago. What? Suddenly, I was the one confused. You've been practically comatose for days. Days? I let out a nervous chuckle. That can't be. It was just last night I was singing to you. Her brows flickered, and she blinked away the shine in her eyes. Uncle Felix said you were actually dead for 8 minutes and 27 seconds. He tried to revive you. Dead? How could that be? I'd had moments of lucidity. How could I have not known that I'd died? That cold feeling of disbelief swept over me again, and I stumbled back into the dresser, catching myself. I don't remember any of that at all. Just moments of waking and sleeping. But it felt like it happened over the span of an evening. You came down with an awful fever. Mr. Morris arrived and you were still in bed. I had no choice but to tell Agatha about the cut on your arm, so she had Uncle Felix look at it. Then you stopped breathing, and he started talking about wheeling you down to the morgue. Well, I was beside myself, and then you started breathing again. Clearing her throat, she flapped her hands at her eyes, as if trying to stave off the tears, and pointed to my hand, still covering my eye. The condition with your eye is called duoculos, according to Uncle Felix. He doesn't know what caused it, but he said it's relatively harmless. At that, I lowered my hand, somewhat relieved. What does he think of the cut? He told Agatha to monitor it. If it didn't get better, they were considering chopping it off. I'm just relieved you're better. You must be starving." It wasn't until she suggested the possibility of food that I noticed the ravenous ache in my stomach. "I am, a little. I'll grab you some warm broth. Probably better that you take it slow. No big meals. Probably. Well, now you're awake. I can finally celebrate the victory of seeing Agatha absolutely beside herself with anger. The worry and grief in her eyes from moments ago cut to a wicked expression of satisfaction. Thought she was going to have to return that money to Mr. Moros. She broke 3 good vases, according to Lala. She chuckled and plucked the brush from the dresser, drawing it carefully through my hair. Just imagining such a thing brings me joy. Happy to have obliged, I went as she tore through a knot. "And Mr. Moros? It seems you've not rid yourself of him. He's come to check on you every day, leaving chocolates and flowers." She gathered up my hair and brushed the roots, chopping at them with haste. "I hope you don't mind. I ate quite a few of the chocolates. Had to make sure they weren't poisoned, you know." "I'm sure. Honestly, Maeve, I could cry of happiness right now." Without warning, arms enveloped me from behind, the pressure at my throat damn near choking me. "You looked absolutely terrible for a minute there," I feared. Well, with Father having, the wobble in her voice told me she was holding back more tears, and being here, alone, I'm here. I gripped her arm still banded at my throat. "I'm not going anywhere. I'll go get you that broth. Stay put." I nodded, and the moment she released me and scurried out of the room, I turned back to the mirror, staring at my eye. "Do woke you lose," I whispered. The sound of a shout snapped my attention toward the window, and I ambled that way, catching sight of 2 boys, perhaps no more than 12 or 13, across the dirt road at the edge of the forest. Though difficult to see from that distance, it appeared as though they were stomping on something. I squinted, noting a black object beneath the boot of the boy wearing a brown hat. And my heart shot into my throat when it occurred to me. They were near the winterberry bush, where I'd buried the raven. No, I shut the window open on a creak, and a rush of cold air nearly knocked me backward. Hey you, get away from there." The boys ignored me, keeping on with their violent stomps. A dark and wicked anger stirred in my gut. I opened my mouth to scream, yet nothing but a high-pitched screech escaped me. I slapped my hand over my mouth and backed out of the window, ducking below the sill. What in the 7 hells was that? A peek over the sill showed the boys stomping away, clearly not having heard me at all. Or perhaps they had and didn't care. But then they stopped, and one of the boys turned toward the forest behind them, as if he'd heard something. I pushed to my knees, curious. A flash of black flew past the boys and up into the sky. Looming over them, what looked like a colossal-sized raven flapped wings that must have spanned the width of a small cottage. My jaw creaked open as I took in the size of it. The creature exploded into a flock of ravens that caught as they scattered off. A scream jarred me out of my staring toward the sky, and I glanced down to find one of the boys clutching the edge of the archway, as though something was pulling him by his feet into the woods. His friend grabbed his shirt, tugging him the other way. He lost his grip and flew backward, the impact knocking his hat to the ground. I blinked, and the other boy was gone. A cold sensation moved through me as I stared down at that now empty archway, with its ominous bones. An itch at my arm had me mindlessly scratching around my wound. The other boy pushed to his feet and peered into the forest. The itch turned to a burning sensation. "Don't do it," I whispered, watching him step closer. Closer? The scratching of my arm became frantic. "Don't do it." "Don't do what?" At the sound of Elysia's voice, I jumped back, and it was then I noticed the inflamed skin around my wound and the blood trickling into the grooves of the scar. I glanced toward the forest again, to find the other boy was no longer there. only a flock of ravens pecking around the grass. I'd have thought the forest had taken him too, but there was no sign of his hat, nor the black objects they'd been stomping. No upturned dirt from where I could see. I thought. They were boys at the woods, I said, the confusion in my head carrying into my voice. I saw one of them get taken. It must have been the lingering shock that kept me frozen, staring. That scene looping inside my mind. They were screaming. Did you hear the screams, Elysia? No? Surely she would have. As thin as the cottage walls were, we'd heard strange noises coming from the forest a number of times. By chance, did you happen to see an exceptionally large bird that exploded into smaller birds? No. Did you see a large bird that exploded into smaller birds? Hearing her ask that aloud had me shrinking into myself. How completely insane I must have sounded. No, I just thought, some fresh air, I think I need air. I finally turned around to see her holding out a bowl of broth and a slice of bread for me. I think you need some rest, maybe some food, she said, prodding the food toward me. I've had plenty of rest. Yes, well, eat something before you slip into delirium. Though I fear it's too late, she muttered under her breath. I could actually stand a quick walk first. What? No, you need to eat, Maeve. You haven't eaten in. I snatched the bowl from her hands and tipped back the broth, slurping it until I'd polished off the whole thing, though I immediately regretted it at the roiling in my stomach. Alicia's jaw hung open as she stared back at me, and half-heartedly accepted the empty bowl when I handed it back to her. There, I ate. I snatched up the bread and ripped a piece with my teeth as I stepped past her for the door. Where are you going? You should probably have someone go with you. I just want some fresh air. I'll be fine. Okay. Fine. But if you're not back at the toll of the quarter bell, I'm coming to look for you. Deal. I slipped out of my nightclothes, keeping my arm out of sight and into my black dress and boots, then padded quietly down the stairs in hopes of avoiding Agatha. The moment my feet hit the lower level, I froze. A tall, gaunt figure stood at the foot of the stairs, Uncle Felix, munching on a sandwich of undoubtedly smelt fish and fig jam as he was known to eat. He regarded me with a cocked brow before biting into his loathsome lunch. Likewise, I bit into my bread. He turned into the parlor, and I kept on out the front door. The frigid air stiffened my muscles as I ran across the dirt road toward the woods, glancing up at the sky on occasion to make sure there was no terrifying colossus bird overhead. By the time I reached the woods, the birds that had been pecking there scattered off. As I neared the winterberry bush, I slowed my steps on seeing the undisturbed grave, no black object in sight. I swept my gaze over the area to find no footprints, no sign of struggle or grooves where someone might have been dragged over the dirt. It was real. All of it was so real. I turned back around toward the house and spied Elysia staring at me through our bedroom window. I didn't have to see her face up close to no lines of worry etched her brow. I'm losing my mind. I must be. Breathe. Just breathe. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply. And on an exhale, I opened my eyes to a flash of silver buried in the piled dirt. Leave it alone. I couldn't, though. Against my better judgment, I knelt to the ground and dug at the grave until I loosened what appeared to be a black and silver scaled and oval object, roughly the size of a melon. An egg of some sort, judging by the shape of it, but no sign of the raven I'd buried there. Frowning, I looked back to the empty grave and the object again. I examined its rough surface, trying to imagine what it could have been. Over my shoulder, I stared at the entrance to which knell. Nothing lurked there besides an errant breeze that winnowed through the crooked limbs, but it was that eerie placidity that cast a shiver down my spine and urged me to turn away. The egg sat in my palm, and I held it up to examine the silver-lined scales on its surface. I stretched my left arm out enough to slide my sleeve back for the scar there, and the silvery scales that also accented the feather's rough shape. My mind puzzled the connection. The bird I'd buried, the cut I'd sustained, and now the egg. "What have you got there, girl?" The gravelly voice from behind me sent a quiver across my spine like a tuning fork. I slowly turned to find the crone witch leaning on a wooden cane, much like Agatha's. Up close I could see the pronounced wrinkles in her skin and a scar next to her milky white eye that looked like she'd gone blind. I found this on the ground. Rao quirked. She glanced to the grave and back to me. "You dug it up?" "No, I saw it in the ground and... well, yes." A wicked smile curved her lips. "I'm sorry, I'll put it back." I turned to place the egg back beneath the bush. "It's yours now, girl. You must take it with you." "Do you know what it is?" The clang of the quarter bell startled my muscles. Despite being distant from where we stood, and on instinct, I looked toward the sky again. "It's your penance, a life for death." "Mabeth!" Elysia called to me from across the field. "Coming!" I shouted back. But at the grip of my arm, I turned back toward the witch, whose eyes were wide and blazing with urgency. "What do you see, girl?" Her gaze fell to my arm and she ran her fingers over the scar there. I wrenched free, nearly dropping the egg tucked into my elbow. "Do not put your hands on me. You see the dead. You hear them speak to you. I hear nothing of the sort. Only those possessed by evil hear such things. Is that so?" Her response made me pause. "Do you hear voices or see the dead?" I asked. "My sight is far keener for this world. I see a daughter shunned by her kin. You don't have to have keen sight to see that. I also know that the delicate black rose doesn't grow well in these parts. Our winters are far too cold for its fragile roots." I puzzled her words and their meaning. Everyone knew I'd been found with a black rose, but maybe she knew something more, something they didn't. Where do they grow? Where the gods see fit to plant them. The way she talked in circles had my already muddled head spinning. You believe in the gods? Not a single god, but many. Admitting such a thing would have been confessing to a crime. The god to which you pray fears the power of many. Leverians worship many gods. Are you Leverian? Leverians weren't the only ones who worshipped many gods. "Maveth," Elysia called again, impatience thick in her tone, and I caught a glimpse of her making her way toward the dirt road. "Coming!" I shouted over my shoulder again, not daring to take my eyes off the witch. And what happens if this egg should hatch? It begs the question. What happens when the dead return from the grave? Her dark chuckle sent a shiver down my spine. "Go now, girl. Wouldn't want you to get swept away like two curious boys." My blood turned cold. "You saw them?" "I see everything." The way she tipped her chin down, looking at me beneath her bushy white brows, had me backing slowly away from her. When I turned around, I tucked the egg behind my back so as not to draw Elysia's attention to it. "What are you doing by those woods?" Elysia chided as I padded toward her. "Was it not enough to have a man's skin tossed at your boots?" I was talking to the crone witch. Her face twisted to a look of pure repulsion. The crone witch, the woman who eats children, Maveth. I glanced over my shoulder to see the old woman yanking a cord of wood from a piled stack of them with little struggle. Don't tell me you're swayed by rumor now. Of course not. But don't you find her just a little unsettling? Yes, I do. I also find her intriguing because of it. You're beginning to concern me, sister. And what in God's eyes are you hiding behind your back? It's nothing. I pulled it from my back, cradling it in my arms. Just an unusual rock I found by the woods. That doesn't look like any rock I've ever seen. And you intend to decorate our bedroom with that thing? I'll keep it under my bed. I just thought it was interesting. I ran my finger over the scales on the outside. the texture reminding me of an enormous acorn. It's probably cursed if you found it near those woods. Better to keep it outside of the house. At the sound of an approaching carriage, both of us turned to see someone coming up the road. "No," Elysia said beside me. "Who is it?" "Mr. Moros, hurry inside. I'll tell him you're still ill." "What if he's seen us?" "I'll still tell him you're ill and can't accept company. Now go." I rushed across the yard and plowed through the cottage entrance, eggs still tucked in my arm. At the top of the staircase stood Agatha, and my heart sank into my stomach. "Good God, you look ghastly with that deformed eye. Yet I see you're doing well now. And how timely Mr. Moros has arrived to check on you. Such a kind man to inquire about you these past few days. Fortunately, he wasn't troubled by your appearance." She hobbled her way down the staircase, and I clutched the egg tighter, offering a smile to distract her from the object. "I heard he paid me many visits. So kind." She stopped alongside me, and in as subtle a movement as I could muster, I slid the egg to my side along my hip. Leaning in, she sniffed and crinkled her nose. "Heavens, you smell like a pig's pen. Go wash yourself quickly. I suspect he'll want to visit with you for a spell." "Yes, of course." Lowering my gaze, I slipped past her up the staircase, and when I reached the top, she called out to me. "And Maveth, he may want to examine you. A fair request given what he's paid." "What do you mean, examine?" "No need for undergarments, my dear.